Happy Saturday, everyone. This is Jay. Thank you for coming to my channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about Palantir a bit later on, but right now, the first thing I want to do is watch the Reagan National Defense Forum and a specific panel for defense in the digital age, US cyber capabilities, and the future of warfare. Why does this matter to me? Because it has our CEO, Dr. Alex Karp, on the panel. He's going to be talking about, uh, I guess, anything and everything related to U.S. national security, and hopefully, maybe even some tidbits about Palantir and what they're working on. So, my purpose today is to share with you my thoughts, my reactions of the panel. And, we can have a great ongoing discussion. Feel free to leave a comment or your feedback below. Love your support. This is my second YouTube video. It's been on my mind for so many years, but I just never got around to it because I've always been busy with my 9 to 9 grind where I would work in finance, and it's been hard to come around to finding that free time to get to do something that I always wanted to do. So, right now this is a low production video. There's no fancy gadgets, none of that. I'm just shooting with a webcam and my headset and, sharing my thoughts. And I hopefully can add some value to your day and help you think about things that, you've never thought of before when watching videos like this. So, let's get started. Oh, that was my test video actually. But yeah, let's get started with the actual video from the Reagan National Defense Forum that took place today at 4 p.m. Oh, and before it begins, I think it's worth saying that, Reagan National Defense Forum, they're the ones who are hosting this seminar. So feel free to go onto their website. I'll leave the description in my YouTube video comments or YouTube video description. ReaganFoundation.org. Please feel free to donate to the organization that is organizing this panel and is allowing us to see it on YouTube.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The panel session is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The session is about to begin.
Okay, I guess there's a lot of people.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Panel 4, Defense in the Digital Age, U.S. Cyber Capabilities and the Future of Warfare. Please welcome Representative Mike Gallagher, Admiral Michael Gilday, General Paul Nakasone, Dr. Alex Karp, and moderator Julian Barnes of the New York Times.
How we doing? We good?
We good? Okay.
Uh-oh.
All right. Uh-oh.
I love how distant Alex Karp is.
Get the iPhone.
He's just like, yeah,
Perfect.
can't be too close to these people.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Julian Barnes from the New York Times. I am going to introduce our speakers here as I ask them questions, but I want to remind you all that I can get questions from you right here on this lovely little iPad if you would submit them via the app or put them on Twitter with the hashtag RNDF. So thank you for coming. I'm going to jump right into this, and I'm going to start with General Paul Nakasone, the Director of the National Security Agency, the head of U.S. Cyber Command. General Nakasone, you've spoken a lot about the changing strategic environment that we face here. And at this conference, we've already been talking a lot about China. And China's been a cyber challenge, cyber threat for a long time. I want you to talk a little bit about how that strategic environment has changed at your time as in command, and talk to us a little bit about the challenge of China.
Yeah, I mean, so I think we'd all agree it's nice to be back at Reagan in person. 2019 was the last time I think all of us were there. In fact, many of us were on a panel. And so to come back here, I think not only is it striking to be back in the presence of all of you, but the other piece of it is think about how much the world has changed in 2 years. And nowhere has that world changed more than in cyberspace. Think about what we've seen as a nation over the past 11 months. We've seen SolarWinds, Colonial Pipeline, Microsoft Exchange, JBS, Kaseya. We've seen ransomware. We've seen implants. We have seen proxy forces. This is in 11 months. But to your question, Julian, what I would say is that what I've seen over 3 years is really three things. First of all is the realization that we have to compete in cyberspace, that we can't stay and be passive. We have to compete because our adversaries are competing. Secondly is the role of influence. You know, we began the influence piece in 2018 with the Russia Small Group and a focus on a safe and secure election. Our adversaries have moved on from elections to other topics upon which they're trying to create influence operations. And truly the last piece is, I think that what we've learned is that it's all about partnerships. We succeed through partnerships. Our partnerships internal to us begin with the National Security Agency and U.S. Cyber Command, tight partnership. But it's broader than that. It's working with private industry like Alex in terms of what we can be able to do. It's working with, obviously, the services, the interagency. This is the piece that makes us successful. It's also the same piece that's going to make us successful against China.
Okay. All right. So I'm not going to talk for long, but I really found it noteworthy that the speaker took the time to highlight the importance of working with private, quote unquote, directly with looking at Alex Karp, which goes to show the influence that Alex Karp has and the importance that these generals give to Alex Karp and his private company, or his company, which is called Palantir, that we're all investors in, or, you know, you're doing research on. Anyways, let's continue.
I'm now going to turn to Admiral Michael Gilday, the Chief of Naval Operations. Earlier in your career, you were the head of the Navy's cyber operations, the 10th Fleet. As you prepare the Navy for the future, linking all your vessels together, how are you thinking about the cyber domain, and both for defending those ships and those networks and fighting in the cyber domain in the future?
So cyber is inextricably linked to everything. It might be a bit heretical to say this, but you know, is it its own domain when it is so interconnected with everything and everybody? And so with respect to the Navy, we have to be able to connect things at long distances, and we have to be able to be connected to a joint force so that we maintain that synergy that we're known for and that we succeed because of. And so one of the biggest efforts that we have undergoing right now, and my number 2 priority, is a task force called Overmatch. And it's the focus of Overmatch is to provide a software-defined systems of systems, networks of networks that allows us to transmit any data over any path, and to get it to microprocessing.
All right, so I'm gonna do this again, but I think it's worth. I don't know if anyone's caught this, but he said systems over systems, networks over networks, being able to transfer data across all these channels. This is what Palantir does. Palantir brings data together into one master pool, allowing people to make insightful decisions in a timely manner to get the results that you're looking for. And I'm going to actually, after this video, I'll go through some of the use cases that I found where Palantir has made a difference in military options that are that are known or publicly discussed. Yeah, let's get back to it.
Applications at the far end for one big reason: decision advantage, the ability to decide and act faster than the other guy. And so whether it's the Chinese, the Russians, or anybody else, that capability, that effort is making great strides, number one, mostly due to the capabilities that exist right now in the private sector, and leveraging the good work that's going on in industry, particularly small companies, that have allowed us to harness that technology and to turn it quickly, to experiment, fail fast, regroup, and to double down. And so I do think, to your point with your question, that has to be a central concern of not just the Navy, but the Joint Force going forward, that we're able to use each other's data in a way to put us in a position of advantage against any adversary.
Dr. Alex Karp is the co-founder of Palantir, and the chief executive. Dr. Karp, how can the private sector better help to counter the cyber threat, better work with NSA, better work with the military? What do we need to do to make these sort of partnerships more robust?
Well, thank you. I'm hugely honored to be here on stage in front of people who serve our nation. Palantir, most of our customers are commercial. Most of our revenue doesn't come from intel.
I love how, no one's taken the time to mention Palantir. The first thing Alex Karp does as a CEO is clearly mention, first thanking the guests who are there, and then clearly mentioning Palantir. I really love that he did that. He's, advocating for the company, which is fantastic. And, that's something he needs to do on a regular basis, especially in a forum like this, which is amazing.
Panel and Defense, and we're pretty global. I think first, part of our history was both being born in Silicon Valley and then leaving Silicon Valley. I think the first thing industry needs to do is affirm that if it's going to work with adversaries, it should always supply at least as good a technology to our services and the people who are defending our nation, which, in the past has not been the case, always. America, one of the things that we forget because it's so obvious to us, to the rest of the world, but often not to us, is in software, America is the #1 nation in the world, bar none. There is really no number two. Number two is Israel, because there has to be a number two. But we are #1. And I spent a lot of my life abroad. I speak German, wrote my dissertation in German, and I get people baffled all over the world asking me, how can it be that America is so much better at this than we are? Take Germany, has a lot of smart people, but the delta between what America delivers in software and what everyone else delivers is very wide. And so the key question for me is, how do we make sure that people doing the most important work in the world, like people on the stage, have access to the resources we already have? Some of that is educational. People who are in industry and leadership positions must tell their employees, if you are developing software in this country, you are going to give it to the people on the stage and people in this room, and explain why. That I think is actually the most important thing. There's a lot of interest, as you see from the opening remarks, of leveraging industry and hardware and software. The US government has moved from a government that bought software in a way that was hard for people who build software to supply, namely off PowerPoints, to being the leader in the world in buying software that actually works. This is an enormous shift, and no other government in the world that I work with, and we don't work obviously in certain countries, but in the Western world, almost every country has made this shift. So that if you want to supply software to the US government, you will show it working in the real world, which means that we're in an iterative cycle in a way that no other country is. And then there's the cultural. I mean, why is America so good at software? Well, we actually play fair in teams. We have highly technical people. We're goal-oriented. And we are willing to admit we're wrong and not be stained by failure when we screw up. So I think what we need to do is continue on this trend. I think U.S. government officials should really say loudly to people they want to work with who are developing software that they must supply the best software in the world to them. I think we in industry, by the way, it's often framed as you framed it, but I would say from my vantage point, there are certain technical issues like how do you do AI at the edge? How do you actually create an all-encompassing environment, which is what we're doing with a lot of industry in the Western world, but where the data is segmented. So if you have a global industry, you're not going to be able to hit the data store in France, Korea, America because of regulatory issues. These are challenges that the U.S. government understands very well and has made great efforts to solve that industry doesn't understand yet, that industry is not yet even actually aware of its existence of. And a lot of our reason we've done well is we've understood these things early. So I think there's the kind of interaction is working. It could work a lot better, but there is also a lot of responsibility on U.S. industry to step up and do more.
We'll get into some of those issues a little in more depth in a little bit. I want to.
Well, I'm not surprised. Alex has delved into a lot of deep issues, but I think one of his main takeaways, and I do agree with it, is any company that's resident in a nation, if they're generating software for industry or countries outside, they should absolutely offer the same, if not better, to their own resident country. It makes absolutely no sense that some firms would refuse to do that in the US. So I don't know which firms Alex is referring to, but I am shocked that there are some companies that are not willing to give the US government the best software available so that the government itself can do what it needs to do to, pursue its interests and protect its interests. And, I think that's kind of the shift that kind of makes Alex Karp and Palantir a bit of an outlier. They're not ashamed to say that they're proud to be American and they're proud to serve American interests and Western interests in extension. A lot of the big social media companies, I realize they're restricted by, social norms because they're social media companies, and also their own business interests because, the most allowed or the most buzz generating people on social media are the ones who have very, very, very specific positions on certain issues. So social media companies always have to walk that fine line to not upset too many people, and it always comes down to business. I've always gotten that impression from most of the big social media companies that it always comes down to business, and they don't really care about ethics or principles, like what is right for the company, the community, the nation. It seems like Palantir really works that way. So I could feel confident that Palantir's relationship with the government will always be endless, in the sense that even if the administrations change, every administration coming in will always know that Palantir has the US's interests at heart and is always working to make sure that the US is always the top dog. So that's that's something that is very clear through Alex Karp's opening remarks, which was a little segment in of itself. All right, let's get going.
Turn the floor to Mike Gallagher, who is the U.S. representative, a U.S. representative from Wisconsin, don't want to shrink the state, is the...
Really the U.S. representative.
and the co-chair of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. Mike, you've been talking about the cyber threat from China, specifically some alarms about Taiwan. And I'm wondering, could a conflict over Taiwan begin with a cyber operation? Talk about what you're thinking there.
Short answer is yes, but I'd like to start with something that Dr. Karp said a few weeks ago, which is that I found very refreshing, which is that American companies that seek to do business with China should be forced to disclose and defend their position. Forgive me if I've paraphrased that inelegantly. I think that's absolutely correct, particularly in light of the recent changes that the CCP has made to exert near total control over the data that foreign firms have if they're operating in China, and in light of the fact that the risk of a confrontation over Taiwan is increasing, or at least the Navy continues to tell us that it is likely. Admiral Davidson, before he left, said within the next 6 years it could happen. At one point in a hearing, the CNO agreed, as well as the Commandant of the Marine Corps agreed, and I think the private sector is underestimating the extent of pain that would be involved for all Americans in general, but them in particular, if that really comes to a head within the decade. And increasingly, I'm convinced that corporate America is going to be forced to choose at a time when too many American tech companies are like resurrecting IBM's 1930s justification for doing business with Nazi Germany under the banner of world peace through trade. That has to stop. And until that stops, I think we're going to be behind the curve, because in such a confrontation, and I'll get to your point, Las Vegas rules would not apply, right? What happens in the Taiwan Straits would not be confined there. Not just because of the financial and economic escalation, but because I do believe that there would be an attempt to target our critical infrastructure here domestically in the United States. And I think we, and I include Congress in this, have done a poor job messaging to the American people how much at risk we are to a devastating cyber attack if we confront the PLA over Taiwan. Both in an effort to impose economic pain on us, they could target our electricity grid, water systems, et cetera, but also our entire ability to surge humans and weapons and other material to a fight, which we would have to do because we don't have the necessary forward forces right now, depends upon key logistics and transportation nodes that are owned in large part by the private sector. So our aerial ports of debarkation, our seaports of debarkation would be a target, right? Look how much chaos was caused by the Ever Given blocking Suez. Imagine something like that in the Panama Canal. So I just fear we're not attacking this with a sense of urgency. I fear we're sleepwalking into a disaster that could define the course of the 21st century. And I feel like unless we change course, that we're going to lose. We're going to lose World War III before it begins, either through preemptive surrender or battlefield defeat. And so I think we have to ask some hard questions. Are we?
Well, I wasn't expecting anyone to talk about World War III in this panel, so it kind of freaks me out to think that, in my lifetime we might see a World War III. But I get what this individual is saying, that, the U.S. and a lot of U.S. firms are very, very reliant on Taiwan for its chips, for its manufacturing. It's a lot of semiconductor manufacturing happens in Taiwan, and that's what goes into your phones, your computers, your satellites. So if there is an attack that cripples networks and you need to replace them, but you can't because Taiwan has been seized or is under a naval blockade, so there's no exports of chips or whatever. I'm trying to imagine a crazy scenario like that where everything is burned, every electronic you need is not working, and you can't do anything about it. Then you've already kind of technically lost the war before it begun, because your adversaries are way ahead of you. So it's interesting that he we this dark this quick, but I guess this is a reality that people need to face. Not a reality that's going to happen, but it's an option and it might be possible. And I'm saying this because in the past, the Chinese government, whether it was I actually don't even know who it was, but I remember in the past that there's been land disputes and between the Chinese and the Indian government, and the presidents of both countries were having coffee or tea, and they thought everything was great, and then the next day, China pushed to take back their land that they said belonged to them, and India was not ready at all. So that was that was a dispute that happened many years ago, but you can't scope out any possible scenario with any adversary because every country wants to protect their own best interests. So if you're an American, you have a lot of reasons to be concerned about what's happening internationally, especially with Taiwan, who is dealing with its own little situation. So let's keep going.
Are we wargaming the financial and economic escalation? Are we wargaming the risk posed to the homeland from a cyber attack? For JADC2, and I salute the way in which the CNO has prioritized overmatch, but when is that going to be operationally capable? If it's not before 2025, that may be too late. And for other things, I just think the ultimate choice that a lot of American companies are going to have to make is between whether they want to do business with the U.S. government and the defense industry in particular, or whether they want to do business with a genocidal communist regime that, as a mere matter of fiduciary responsibility, is a massive, massive risk for them. Other than that, I'm an optimist.
Okay, so I actually want all three of our other panelists to react to Representative Gallagher here. General Nakasone, talk a little bit about some of these issues here. Is American critical infrastructure sort of at risk in an initial conflict over Taiwan? Should we have you've had hunt forward, defend forward teams in a variety of allied countries. Is this something that we should have in Taiwan now?
So I agree with Representative Gallagher's point about warfare in the 21st century. I think that borders mean less as we look at our adversaries. And whatever adversary that is, I think we should begin with the idea that our critical infrastructure will be targeted. And I think that's why it's so important, the work that he led in the Solarium Commission, to start looking at that very seriously. One of the things I would say a bit differently, though, is the fact that I think we have made a very, very strong shift to starting to address this. I see the changes that are taking place, and I've watched this now for over a decade. The fact that we have an executive order, the fact that all the services are now starting to talk about how do I secure my weapons platform, the fact that we're taking very, very seriously the partnership opportunities with the private sector in not only things like election security, but how do we look at the future? There's more to be done. I agree, but it's different, again, coming back to my point, than it was in 2019. There was no one that was really kind of talking about the seriousness of what I hear talked about today, and more importantly, starting to address some of those issues.
Admiral Gilday.
In the opening forum this morning, there was a slide that was up. I thought it was quite illuminating that 70% of Americans now view China with strategic concern. And I think we need to leverage that. Certainly, the discussions on Capitol Hill reflect that concern. I think that we're seeing that in the national security strategy. We have an interim strategy now that's being developed, or a more finalized strategy that's being developed. The next national defense strategy, I think, will double down on that. And I think we need to leverage that. The successes that General Nakasone talked about would also include the interagency work that went on in support of our 2018 elections, in support of our 2020 elections, not only as a joint force, our ability to intertwine cyber, his work into our conventional warfare areas, but also, perhaps even more importantly, with respect to defending the country, is that cooperation within the interagency. Some of that you saw, the grease of those wheels, I think, were some of the authorities that we saw that were given to General Nakasone, his teams in 2019. I would be more of an optimist than a pessimist about the direction that we're heading in. I do think, to Representative Gallagher's points, we do need to be concerned and take it seriously. I don't talk to anybody that's not concerned about China and the posture that we have to take. I think for us, coming out, rolling into the new year and a new defense strategy, a budget that will be presented, another one that's close to being delivered to this administration, I really do think that that forces us to focus on what we invest in, both in the here and now and for the future. So that, if anything, this bipartisan agreement about China being a concern helps us laser focus on what's prioritized in terms of what we invest in to defend the country.
Dr. Karp, after your CNBC interview a couple weeks ago where you said American high-tech companies shouldn't do work with China, what was the reaction? And, are you moderating that a little bit by saying, like, you at least do the work with the United States? Or do you feel like a Google, a Microsoft shouldn't be working with the Chinese government?
Well, first of all, we're in our little myopic perch in the valley. So the background in the valley is we've been fighting the valley aggressively pretty much since we started our company in 2004. And we've been battling the valley on two issues. One, it is my deep belief and the belief of my company that, it's pretty odd to be able to sell your product abroad under very fair terms, essentially because our allies are willing to go along with your pricing because they're being protected by people who are here, and then not ship your software to them, A. B, I'm very in favor of free speech. If people disagree with working with the U.S. military, great, they should be able to voice that, but you as a leader should explain to them, I would hope, what the history is of especially the U.S. military. And, not that I have to lecture anyone here, but it's surprising how many people I have to lecture in the Valley about, the positive effects and what the world would look like without the efforts of people in the U.S. military. But be that as it may, while they protested my house every day and put barbed wire around our cafeteria, we at Palantir, not just me, but engineers who were 22, fought through that to be able to do something that is more important than just working with the many companies we work with. And so we're already on the unpopular side. And by the way, we say in public what we say in private in this context, which you're also not supposed to do according to Valley rules. So we're.
Oh man, that was actually kind of funny because he's literally, not holding back. He's not holding back on taking shots at the big companies in Silicon Valley. And I did my MBA. I did one of my MBA cases. I think it was in economics. It was in economics where I talked about Apple and how they get their margins so high, and it's largely because it's fabricated, or the production facilities are all done or managed by Foxconn in China. And there's been so many cases of people jumping off buildings trying to kill themselves in China because all they did every day, nonstop, and then 12-hour days, was carve out the little apple on the metal sheet and then go to the next one, carve out next one. That's it. Nothing else. They never saw the final product. They never knew what it looked like. And then they would go back to their room, sleep for a little bit, and then go straight back into the factory and do it again. And that's all they did for very, very little sums of money. And if I remember correctly, it was something ridiculous, like $3,000 a year, I think is what they made, 3,000 US. And, a lot of people wanted to kill themselves because they missed their family. And, a lot of people didn't want to go back home as a failure. So, a lot of people took their own lives. And because of that, Apple had to, move quick and tell its supplier Foxconn to change things up and try to walk a fine line between shifting the blame to Foxconn and managing some responsibility. And their solution was putting nets around the building rooftops so that when people jump, they don't die and they get caught in the net. And taking a step back from all of that, the fact that there are companies like that who are operating in China and forcing people to go through that kind of work experience, and they brush their hands clean because they're based in California. uh, it's like, I guess, morally apprehensible. Like it feels, it just doesn't rub me the right way. And no country would even allow that to happen to their employees. So what does that say about the rules that exist in these countries? But the key takeaway is, Alex Karp is clearly acknowledging that, his company doesn't ride with the crowd. They don't ride with the wave. They don't try to be safe and just do what everyone else is doing. And the people there are really bold. They have their own convictions, and they follow through. And he just took another shot, saying, whatever they say in private is what they say in public. So it seems like all the talk that happens at the big social media companies about U.S. government policies, all of that, they keep it internally, but everybody knows that they clearly have a certain position on a variety of U.S. policies, and that means they might prefer one political party at some times over another political party at other times. So yeah, so let's continue.
We're a little used to being unpopular. I actually had a very minimal standard, which is lower in the interview. I tell people in the Valley, if you want to do something, that's your right. This is America, by the way, fought for by people on the stage. But be that as it may, you do have a responsibility to articulate what is it you're doing and why are you doing something with an adversary you're not doing with the U.S. government. That is your responsibility to this country and to everybody in the Valley, for which I'm a pariah, whatever. And that's what I believe. I think there should be a most favored nation status, i.e. America. And you should have to, and I also believe there's something wrong with, not explaining to people what the backdrop is of the way in which the world works. But any case, but the key point for me is, why does it matter so much? It matters so much because the core differentiator in technology now for America is software. It's not just that we're not delivering candy toys. We are delivering the thing that we are the best at in the world, and the difference is not linear. So it's not like we have a slightly better can opener than other countries. No, we have the can opener. And for whatever reason, it's very hard for other countries to do what we do. And that is our central advantage. And I know from the way we built Palantir that we are constantly, like in the commercial context, we constantly try to get the most complex IT projects in the world and put them in our platform. Why? Because that's our central advantage. We're bad at sales, but we're great at product. So we want everyone to, and that if you're central.
Alex is really good at one thing. He keeps mentioning that commercial is their biggest revenue stream, but it really seems like online the vibe is that Palantir is all government and they have very little commercial. But here in a panel in front of the U.S. government and its representatives, Alex Karp is saying the complete opposite, that commercial is his biggest revenue stream. And apart from that, he also takes it as a pride and as a challenge to invite the most complex data problems to Palantir and work on those projects to solve it, to gain that competitive advantage. Because if you work only on hard things and you keep crushing it, obviously you're more geared and more prepared. And on top of that, your client is paying you to develop the solution, which is an R&D, which would otherwise be an R&D expense, but now it's a project expense. So it's revenue generating right away, whatever you're investing to learn and solve this complex problem. But then your knowledge gained from that project can be applied to any others who are facing similar problems or a part of that problem, which is fantastic, because when other people are running away from complex projects, it looks like Palantir is running right into them and telling their commercial clients or these commercial opportunities, let us do this project and we will solve your most complex problem. And what do we have to gain from it? Obviously your business, but we'll learn from this and we might be able to help the rest of the world. So this is something that a lot of people tend to miss. You know, this is not Google Analytics. This is not DocuSign. This is not, Photoshop or telemedicine, book your doctor's appointment. This is something completely different. This is issues that many companies deal with quietly and often hire consultants from IBM, pay them $750 an hour, $500 an hour, $350 an hour for a year nonstop, get another extension to come up with a bootleg solution for their problems. That might work until the next iteration of the software that's needed for a growing business. So yeah, let's continue.
Central advantage is X. You cannot give that up, and we should not let people give it up. And if they want to give it up, they don't want to deliver, great, stand on stage, go on TV. They all like being on TV more than I do. Explain why you're not going to give this to the Army, the Navy, the NSA. Great, explain it. But you can't then not explain it.
I want to call up a slide. This is another question from the Reagan Institute panel. Reagan Institute poll that came up, and it talks a little bit about military capabilities. This is from the Reagan Institute's annual poll of Americans, and it's the perception of military capabilities. And it's not a military institute.
At product advantage. And I know from the way we built Palantir that we are constantly, like in the commercial context, we constantly try to get the most complex IT projects in the world and put them in our platform. Why? Because that's our central advantage. We're bad at sales, but we're great at product. So we want everyone to, and that if your central advantage is X, you cannot give that up. And we should not let people give it up. And if they want to give it up, they don't want to deliver, great, stand on stage, go on TV. They all like being on TV more than I do. Explain why you're not going to give this to the Army, the Navy, the NSA. Great, explain it. But you can't then not explain it.
So I replayed this clip because it's obviously a great statement, but I think the representative on the far right was trying to lock eyes with Alex Karp to give him that, I like what you just said, absolutely. But Alex Karp just completely dodged. He completely dodged that, that bro moment. So it felt like a long time that he was trying to reach out to him, but it wasn't working. So let's just see. Maybe it's just me.
I want to call up a slide. This is another question from the Reagan Institute panel. Reagan Institute poll that came up, and it talks a little bit about military capabilities. This is from the Reagan Institute's annual.
That felt like it was a good 10 seconds that he was staring at him like, yo, come on, man. You know I'm looking at you. And Alex Karp's just like, yo, that's funny. Yeah, let's keep going.
Poll of Americans, and it's the perception of military capabilities. And it's not up here yet, but there are, I'm going to talk about it a little bit while we wait for it to appear. There it is. Excellent, okay, good. I just needed to filibuster a little longer. So I want to, as you're looking at this, I want to draw your attention to a couple of the columns here. We have, when it comes to conventional weaponry, 45% of Americans saying the United States is the best in the world, dropping to 39% when we're talking about high-tech weaponry, and then 27% for cyber capabilities. And so I want the panel to react to a couple things here. One, is the public perception accurate? Are we really just one of the best in the world? And if that is true, does that matter? Is it good enough to be one of the best, or do you need to be the best? And I'm going to start with General Nakasone.
We have to be the best. There's no doubt. I mean, it's, when I look at this, my first thought is that I've got to do a better job of obviously communicating to the American public. I don't agree with that. I mean, I look at it right now, and both as the director of the National Security Agency and commander of U.S. Cyber Command, there's no doubt in my mind. No doubt in my mind. To Dr. Karp's point, I mean, one and then, two is a long ways off. That's not to say that our adversaries have, shrunk some of that military offset, but when you take a look at our capabilities across the world, whether or not it's in foreign intelligence or whether or not it's effects, that's not what I would point it as.
Admiral Gilding.
The first thing that I'd say as I take a look at this slide is don't bet against America. This is about capabilities. This is about the science of war and somebody's missiles that are longer range than our missiles, so it's game over. End of war game, pencils down. That is not the case. It's as much about what we fight with as how we fight. How devilishly fiendish we can be in areas like cyber that give us an asymmetric advantage. Our people are the best in the world. And our job is to make sure that we not only, harvest or attract and recruit the absolute best that our nation has to offer, but that we also retain them. I spoke earlier about the work that General Nakasone led in 2018 and he led in 2020. It was phenomenal work, not just done with exquisite capabilities, but by incredibly well-trained people.
Representative Gallagher, what do you think?
Well, I think this is the poll. Well, the poll accurately reflects the perception of the American people, but I think an accurate statement would be that we are the best in the world in terms of our offensive capabilities, but we have unique defensive problems given the nature of our open society and the prominent role that the private sector plays in controlling 80% of the critical infrastructure in cyber. So the reality is a bit more nuanced than that. However, this makes sense, right? We've had a string of high-profile cyber attacks from SolarWinds, Microsoft Exchange, Colonial Pipeline, an explosion of ransomware. And I think just given the nature of cyber, your average American interacts with it in a way they may not interact with conventional weaponry and high-tech weaponry. It's more pervasive in Americans' daily life. So I understand it. But if you compare this poll, I think, to the 2018 data, what you actually see is it's gone in the right direction. It's gone from 15% who thought we were the best in the world to 27%. So if I'll abandon my pessimism, and my optimistic story would be that because of the work that General Nakasone and his team have done, learning lessons from the 2016 election, applying that to 2018, 2020, everything the CNO talked about, we're headed in the right direction. We have a long way to go, but we're headed in the right direction. What concerns me, however, both Admiral Gilday and General Nakasone referenced the fact that I think the single best thing we've done in cyber in the last 5 years has been to loosen the rules of engagement in order to speed up the decision-making process for cyber. And that was a joint collaboration between the legislative branch and the executive branch. That has been a great thing. We've basically unshackled General Nakasone and his team to do what they need to do to defend us. I know there are discussions underway right now to revise that process and make it more onerous and inject more people into the decision-making process for offensive cyber. I hope I'm wrong about that, but that would be a massive, massive mistake. Because if anything, we need to be looking at how we can build upon that success and further unshackle General Nakasone and his team to do things. For example, I mean, you've talked publicly about how we need to get into the ransomware game. We've successfully recovered ransomware payments. We should be publicizing that. Why not? It's not a covert operation. It's not escalatory. Why are we not publicizing that work to bolster our deterrent posture in cyberspace? We should be doing that as frequently as humanly possible. And above all, we should do nothing to slow down the decision-making process. We don't want to go back to a world in which it's more difficult to get approval for an offensive cyber operation than it is to get approval for a lethal drone strike somewhere. And that was the case in many cases a few years ago.
Excuse me, inopportune cough. General Nakasone, will you react to that? Do you feel that you are, two things. One, the 2018 shift to push down more authority, did that make you more nimble? And is there any fear that that will be adjusted, ratcheted back?
So I think Admiral Gilday hit on a really important point as he talked about the evolution of the policy process here. And really, it's the idea that it's more than just what the Department of Defense is going to do. We're one aspect of it. It was, how do you bring along the interagency? And now I think to the point of, when I think about going forward in the future, is how do we make sure the private sector is tightly woven into this? Because to Representative Gallagher's point, our challenge with a broad attack surface on the defense is, how do we ensure all those 16 sectors of critical infrastructure, the bar is as high as it can be against our adversaries?
Dr. Karp, I want your thoughts, but there's a question from the audience.
All I have to say is, he said, how can we tightly integrate the private sector? And then he went like this. Tight. I think that's very telling that Palantir does have a very important role to play.
For you that I'm going to read off here. You mentioned that the United States is #1 in the world in software. How do you assess China's capability and rate of progress in that area?
Well, there's in some ways linked. We have worthy adversaries. There's I have this long PhD in a totally arcane topic that should have left me without a job. But one of the most useful things about the training was to not turn the person you're critical of, your author you're critical of, into a caricature and then render the caricature irrelevant. It's like, this is our adversaries, really all of them are super intricate, deep cultures with enormous technical and intellectual capabilities. However, it happens in this one area that, and it's a long, there's a debate about who developed the computer, and some people, but I think the real answer is it was even the early developments of the computer with von Neumann in the Manhattan Project. A lot of our capabilities go back to our ability to both bring highly intricate, some people would say batshit crazy, people together under a roof to deliver excellence for not primarily monetary return in the near term. Of course, later you could turn to a business and do well, but and that capability in this one area that looked like it would be one of many technical areas is the dominant area. And our issue as America is to simultaneously be aware of the adversaries, but also realize that to make this work, you have to focus on how do we raise our game to the best game we are. So like when I look at that, I'm like, yeah, I know there are things like projects we've worked on, just Project Maven as an example. I don't know how much, I never know how much one's allowed to say, but like that is there are insights in that project that are very unique and very much done in a way that is not understood and not done as well by others.
Okay, I'm going to just stop the video for a quick second. I'm gonna Google Project Maven. Let's see if we can find anything about it. Ooh, I think I got something. Okay, let's read this. Forbes is pretty credible. And let's read military aerospace. Seems like they're very close to these issues. Okay, wait, let me pause my ad blocker. Project Maven, startups backed by Google, Peter Thiel, Eric Schmidt, James Murdoch, are building AI and facial recognition surveillance tools for the Pentagon. Remember Project Maven? It was the Department of Defense. When Google's staff protested at being asked to build software that improved drone targeting. I mean, okay, but yeah, I get it. Improved drone targeting. It's like, okay, well, I guess the staff was like, don't do drone targeting at all. But America was like, it has to happen regardless. It's the quickest way in and out without harming anyone. We just want to make sure we get someone right. So the first time. So, okay, fine. So Google pulled out of the project. Maven lives on despite the controversy. I have to stop looking over there because my screen is there. But yeah, Maven lives on despite the controversy, and according to analysis of contract records, is thriving. Ooh, okay. Thanks in large part to a cadre of Silicon Valley heavyweights and startups. They include companies backed by investment funds owned by Google's parent company Alphabet, as well as startups whose boards include former Google chief Eric Schmidt, Palantir, and Facebook investor Peter Thiel, and son of Fox News Rupert Murdoch. It enhances the performance of human. The department declined to talk about what contractors were working on Maven Tech, but former Google scientist and founder of Big Tech Monitor Tech Inquiry, Jack Paulson, discovered some contracts signed off with an overarching contract with ECS Federal, a beltway contractor that worked with the DoD to acquire Google AI know-how for Maven. The same contractor went on to do more Maven contracting, bringing on a myriad of Silicon Valley tech companies. Providing the Pentagon with engineering support to apply its AI. Okay. The fact that Alex Karp is talking about Maven definitely means that Palantir is involved in Maven, like, without a doubt. 2 contractors on Tech Inquiry's list of Maven contractors were backed by Thiel, a former Trump ally and Facebook investor. One is Scale AI. One of others, Thiel's better, also scored big with Maven. The contract, the data shows data crunching surveillance juggernaut Palantir, which was already reported to be working on Maven in 2019. But the records reveal for the first time that Palantir was paid $25 million for licenses in 2018 in a Maven-linked deal. The company declined to comment. So I guess it's still ongoing. If they were paid $25 million for licenses, these licenses must be ongoing every year. Interesting. there's so many buzzwords. Anyways, let me get back to the video so that we can continue our experience together.
Including adversaries. But we should be so dominant that nobody can even imagine we're not number one. As with the Manhattan Project, which I think should be our standard. Like, you know, we took a small group of people, interestingly, actually very few from Ivy Leagues. Almost everyone who worked on the project went to like a school in the Midwest. And a bunch of people who were highly eccentric and developed something that was transformational. And de facto, what we're doing in AI is equally as transformational. And you need this combination between people that know the material, that's the people on stage, and people who can extend what they're doing, and also people, in my case, I'm really good at managing really complicated, difficult people. And so that's what I do for a living. And then you get this thing where nobody can, you know, and of course there are these enormous, where no one can imagine they're not number one. And that should be our standard. And if that's the standard, and then most of the issues we have in America are not actually because of adversaries, it's because of internal divisions and not being able to agree on certain things. This is why the shift here, agreement, America having consensus on anything is very powerful. And we haven't had that for lots of reasons you can debate, but we do have it now.
Admiral Gilday, when we last gathered here at the Reagan.
What he said is very true. Like, when Americans do have consensus on something, oh baby, you better stand out of the way. I mean, the last time I've seen something crazy like that was September 11, and you know, within a few days, you know, America was going after anyone or everyone that was on the hit list for possible suspicions for being involved with 9/11. You know, so that was, I think, the last time where everyone was on board, on the same page. And I guess before that would have been something like Pearl Harbor. But the day Americans come together for one thing and they say, this can't happen no more, or we need to do this, it's something special. And history has shown that, you know, many times.
Reagan Library, you talked about this kind of constant cyber activity, this in the gray zone. The example you gave at the time was Russia. And I'm wondering, are we in a constant gray zone cyber battle with China at this time? And what's the nature of that?
I think the gray space really are the global commons. And I think on a day-to-day basis, I'm mostly involved in maritime, but I see the Chinese and the physical looking towards the sea. Belt and Road would be an example. What they've done to reefs, they've militarized reefs in the South China Sea. And so that happens and takes advantage of gaps and seams, perhaps in international law or places where law doesn't exist. And they make gains slowly but surely going forward. I see cyberspace as another global common that they also are involved in this same type of activity, below the level of armed conflict, but certainly flagrantly disregarding international norms, which really have been in place since Bretton Woods in 1944, and have really raised the tide of billions with respect to prosperity, with respect to literacy rates, with respect to immigration, that not just the transfer of commerce, which I would argue floats on seawater, but also ideas. And so that's the contest in gray space. It's the global commons. And what we try to do in the Navy is operate forward, not just to be there with the Chinese, but to be in the way. And I think you need to be in the way. And I don't say that provocatively. I say that just as a matter of fact, because we have the coin of the realm in gray space operations is attribution. We have to be able to attribute those actions that disregard those international norms to them. And we have to do the same thing, obviously, in cyberspace that General Nakasone can speak to much more eloquently than I. But I think it's reality. We have to be out there. We have to be taking advantage of allies and partners that are like-minded for all the reasons that I spoke to earlier about international norms. And I think that the Chinese are isolating themselves through their behavior. People are not running towards them to be their friends. We are gaining trust with allies and partners. They're buying it. There's a big difference.
General Nakasone, I wonder if you could react to that a little bit, and maybe as you talk about it a little bit about what this sort of cyberspace gray zone competition with China looks like now. How are you at Cyber Command working with the Indo-Pacific Command to make sure that the real world operations and the cyberspace operations are meshed?
So coming back to this idea of what's changed over the past 3 years, 2018 was a pivotal year for us in the sense that our department published a concept called Defend Forward. Same idea that Admiral Gilday expressed, but the idea that we would operate in cyberspace outside the United States against our adversaries before they could do harm to us. At U.S. Cyber Command, we call that persistent engagement, the idea of both informing our partners and acting. And it's to Admiral Gilday's point, I like this idea of getting in the way. It's exactly about that we operate in a domain where deterrence is about imposing costs, and imposing costs means that every single day you're operating against an adversary, identifying what they're doing, attributing it, being able to send, as Representative Gallagher talked about, hunt forward teams to different countries to be able to expose operations. This is all part of it, and I think what we have seen is things like, hey, let's publish the top 25 different pieces of malware that the Chinese have produced at an unclassified level. Let's share it with the broad public just so they understand that, hey, we know all about this. And oh, by the way, we'll sign our name to it as the National Security Agency, U.S. Cyber Command, CISA will sign up, and the FBI will sign up to it. And then we have a series of partners that do that as well. And this brings the idea of you're getting in the way, to quote the Admiral's point. This is what it looks like today in terms of being able to ensure that our adversaries have a very, very difficult time to operate.
Representative Gallagher.
I quite like this idea of getting in the way, but it sounds very similar to the concept of deterrence by denial, which was the intellectual cornerstone of the 2018 National Defense Strategy, which I thought was a great piece of work. But now what concerns me is that we are moving away from that intellectual framework towards what I presume the Secretary of Defense will talk about in a few minutes, which is this new concept of integrated deterrence, which I fear is a buzzword that will justify cutting conventional hard power. And what you need in the way primarily in Indo-PACOM is conventional hard power in order for that denial to work. So that's one concern. I agree with what the CNO said about China not making friends. I think in many ways the wolf warrior diplomacy has backfired, although they're playing primarily to a domestic audience or an audience of one, Xi Jinping. However, I don't think we've made any friends with our recent moves in Afghanistan. I think a lot of our friends are questioning our resolve. And what's interesting is they may not need friends to be successful in a Taiwan scenario, right? Particularly if they creatively leverage disinformation, right? You can imagine a disinformation campaign aimed primarily at Taiwan itself, the military. You could imagine a flood of fake or synthetic reports designed to confuse and disorient, fake chat over military communications. Think of the ways in which they could leverage new technology, deepfake technology. You could imagine a video of President Tsai surrendering before it even happened. And for the international community or the non-aligned fence sitters in the region, if that was amplified by a disinformation campaign online or on American social media companies, pushing the narratives that this was all because of a provocation by Taiwan or PLA forces are being hailed as liberators, well, they could confuse us long enough to be successful in a fait accompli. All they need is a little bit of a fig leaf to justify not getting involved, and in that way, the CCP could drive various wedges through our united front in a Taiwan scenario. So there are ways that they could be successful, even if they don't have many friends in the region.
I did not think that Taiwan would be a star in this panel. This representative really is talking about Taiwan and the CCP or the PLA a lot. It's interesting. It's a sign of our times.
Admiral Gilday, are we moving away from deterrence? Are we weakening?
No, not at all. So I think that the use of that word deterrence, and I think the fact that it's going to be the cornerstone of the next defense strategy is really important. There are two aspects that I'll just talk about very briefly. Representative Gallagher mentioned one, which is denying somebody the ability to achieve their objectives. And so in the cyber world, we rely on things like resiliency in order to do that. I also think that there's a second pillar, and it's the punishment pillar, the ability to impose costs. And that's where I think, if I could, I suspect that's where you were going, Representative Gallagher. I think that
extra, most there'll be like % by the people in the world, and then having a. I think that the aspect, the key thing is not sharing the information, it's sharing the capabilities that need to be built, and then having a mechanism in the software context where it's not about the PowerPoint, it's about showing the software working. And this is that's the most important thing. So, a lot of times in these discussions, there'll be like 50 things that could happen, but in my business, there's one thing that has to happen, and that's the most important thing. Now, you want to talk about luxury products? Sure, but I think the most important thing is not sharing extra data with us. So like, as we go into space, a lot of things are classified. Maybe they should be classified, but as the information maybe gets less important because you can also pull it from a commercial satellite, maybe it would be good to have more of that data. And those are real policy discussions, and you can tell by the people on the stage are open to being rational. So that, I think, will happen. I think the bigger issue is sharing results with the U.S. people and our allies, because the U.S. military is the most legitimate institution in America, maybe second to small businesses. And it's important to reiterate, like, Congress is at 13% popularity, and then the U.S. military is at 76% popularity. If we're going to have, every single vaccine in this country is distributed in our software, but the real heavy work happened from engineers from the U.S. military, and no one knows that. I can't tell you the number of people I run into who do not know that the engineering work, certainly done in our platform, was done by people who are in the U.S. military. And there's a legitimacy crisis in this country. We have one institution that people believe in. And the most important thing is to show people what's just exactly like I was articulated. We did this is how we did it, and this is how we're protecting you. And we in industry have more than enough opportunity to succeed. We need to take that opportunity and do more. But sure, luxury product will take more. The most important thing is that the capabilities actually get built, and we get to, it's not a competition on PowerPoints. Otherwise, most people who build products don't do sales. So you need to make sure it's about the product. And the second thing, which has nothing, it's not my interest, is just, and this is, by the way, plagues the Western world. Like, so, the Communist Party of France has in their manifesto, if they win, that they'll ban Palantir, which I'm proud of. and I'm progressive. But in any case, it's one of my great pieces of pride. I hope that, but in any case, we play a big role in Europe in anti-terror. And I tell my progressive friends, most of my friends, you know, if these terror attacks had not been stopped, all those people you would see goose-stepping down the street would be goose-stepping down the street. So you know what? The Western world must show the public more of the results that are happening. And again, in America, there's one institution people believe in, and there's a lot of reasons to believe in this institution. First institution to built the bomb, integrated America. You know, we have all legitimate debates about integration. There's only one institution that actually did it. So, and 2 million people in America, if you include people in online service, are representatives of an organization that delivers. And the most important thing we can do is help Americans, for example, on Project Warp Speed. I don't know what I'm allowed to tell Americans, but I do know people I interact with who are fairly well informed have no earthly clue what you guys are delivering, what other people are delivering, and that is a real problem for our society.
General Nakasone, there's a question from
it's like Alex is like, you know, telling them, I'm a peacock. You need to let me fly. We need to let the people know what we're doing. And it's true. A lot of people, and I've seen it so many times, where people would say, Palantir, spy tech firm, stealing your data. You know, oh, the NSA, the National Health Association, I don't know, the abbreviation for the UK healthcare system, or the American equivalent, is working with Palantir, and oh my God, Palantir works with the CIA. They were funded by the CIA as a spy tech firm. Now they know your data. They know, you know, what your teeth looks like. You know, they know what your blood type is. And people don't realize that Palantir has said this so many times. We don't control your data. We don't see anything about your data. The data owner controls the data, controls who can see what, and can cleanse the data. But it seems like that's all people, for lack of a better word, harp on when it comes to Palantir, because they don't see that Palantir works with, you know, the World Food Program, if I remember correctly, the World Food Program, to make sure that, you know, people who have logistical issues, charities that have logistical issues to get food to different corners of the earth, are relying on Palantir to make sure that the packages do get there. Or, you know, in life sciences, Palantir is helping pharma companies be able to compile all the data that exists across vast research bodies across the world and teaching institutions across the world. You know, Palantir is helping pharma companies put all that data together to unleash new information, you know, new insights that people don't see because it's not obvious and it's not in front of them yet. So, you know, the fact that, you know, Karp is saying like, oh yeah, you know, people need to know what the U.S. military is doing, or any even extension what Palantir is doing. I get it, because there's a lot that they're stopping, but then, you know, governments and politicians don't want to spook the people either. You know, you don't want to live or go to you know, let's say you take the train to downtown every day. Do you want to know that, oh, last week the government stopped somebody from blowing up the train? Or, you know, it happens every month that there's somebody crazy trying to do that. Like, how comfortable would you feel taking your kids to go to school, or to you know, to go to that park in downtown, if you know, you knew that you were this vulnerable? And that's the thing. A lot of people forget how vulnerable we are and how lucky we are to be in an open and free society. And all of that comes at a cost, because technically you can have a lunatic that tries to harm innocent people. And it's great to know that, Palantir is helping government bodies in the US and in other Western civilizations to protect that social fabric, that very vulnerable societal fabric that we have.
From the audience, which touches on some of Dr. Karp's points, which are, how can the United States effectively deter in cyberspace, given that we're generally secretive about our country's offensive and defensive cyber capabilities?
Well, I mean, I think the first point is that we have to look at it differently than we looked at nuclear deterrence. This isn't a binary, yes or no. This is a domain that our adversaries, given the ability to move into this domain so quickly, are going to operate every single day. So we have to operate every single day. We have to have a spectrum of capabilities, everything from the defense to the offense, as you say. And certainly we have to be engaged with that. And I think that at the end of the day, this is how we have success, that we are going to impose costs in a number of different ways, and with the interagency and with the private sector.
If I could just make one comment about that, just to perhaps reinforce General Nakasoni's points. I don't think you have to take credit for everything. And I think that there's a certain advantage whether, if a U.S. team creates a certain effect against a certain adversary, to leave that adversary guessing on who actually did that effect, let them burn the resources to try and figure it out. And perhaps in the back of their mind, they're thinking, yeah, it could have been the Americans. It also could have been some rogue who agrees with America, or it could be another nation state, another like-minded nation state that took the action. So I think, as General Nakasoni, the point I'm trying to reinforce is the fact that it's not exactly like thinking about deterrence as years ago. And I think that there are ways that you can leverage information in powerful ways that we haven't fully explored yet.
Representative Gallagher, do we talk enough or too much about our cyber military capabilities?
Well, earlier I made the case that we don't talk enough. I guess I would respond by saying I don't think the criminal groups are guessing after we launch an attack against them who carried it out in certain cases. It's obviously a mix. It obviously depends on the operation. But I think the big mistake we make, and I agree, cyber deterrence is not perfectly analogous to strategic nuclear deterrence during the Cold War. In fact, we sort of teased that out in the final report of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. But at the end of the day, we're trying to deter certain people and states from doing things, right? It's not like cyber deterrence exists in its own little world. We're trying to deter China, we're trying to deter Russia, we're trying to deter North Korea, and we're trying to deter Iran, largely, from doing bad things, right? It's a bit harder when you talk about criminal groups with opaque connections to state entities, but we are trying to deter decision makers in those countries from doing stupid things that jeopardize our interests. And so we can't sort of talk about cyber deterrence as unconnected from other forms of deterrence or operating under its own unique rule set. I think the tenets of basic deterrence still apply. And as for an earlier strand of conversation, I was primarily talking about deterrence by denial. It's my observation that since we made a commitment to that in 2018, we have not implemented that commitment in any meaningful way, at least in our primary, most important theater, Indo-PACOM, where I think we have a long way to go in terms of reestablishing deterrence before it's too late.
The topic of the panel is also the future of warfare. And, as I was thinking about this, I was wondering, in the future, does the special operations team that gets deployed to overseas, is it going to have a software engineer as a part of it? Is it going to have a couple people from Cyber Command with it? Or is it simply that those will be separate, but they will be as important to be equally nimble and forward deployed or in the future? And I'm wondering, General Nakasone, I'm going to ask all the panel this question as we wrap up. General Nakasone, what are your thoughts?
Presence matters, and we will be there. We're already there. What have we learned over the past 20 years? That we have our developers with our operators. We have them understanding what the issues are. We have our best operators with our elite forces, and they have a number of different capabilities. This is not the future. This is now, and we're practicing it today.
Dr. Karp, what do you think?
Wholeheartedly. It's like if you're talking about the symbiotic relationship between industry and government, then that has to have a micro component, and the micro component will be that you will have operators that are both technical and operators that are more kinetic, and a spectrum, and I think the units will be small and very effective, and I agree. I couldn't say it any better.
Admiral Gilday, any final thoughts from you?
It's got to be a Swiss Army knife. So to reinforce the points that have already been made, it's got to be interoperable. It's got to be integrated, and it has to be generate effects that are technically feasible and operationally relevant. And you're not going to be able to do that quickly against a high-end adversary like China unless you're better integrated. So I think small teams going forward in the future are going to be tailored to different types of operations with exquisite capabilities in ways that I think we're completely open to and are doing it now, experimenting with how we get the biggest bang for the buck.
I agree with what General Nakasone said about presence matters. I would argue that is an enduring lesson from the old school of Cold War deterrence that we can apply to the present day. And I think, having spent a couple of years on this commission, attempting to sort of think about cyber issues, ultimately, I think it's still, it's fundamentally a human problem, right? Both our biggest failures are human failures, and our success will ultimately be a function of whether we can convince the best and the brightest to work with our defense leaders to solve some very difficult issues. And as Brad Smith alluded to in the first panel today, we're not where we need to be, but ultimately, I still believe that we have a lot of very talented, smart patriots in this country that want us to win, that believe deep down that we're still the good guys, and that's absolutely true.
I hope you'll join me in thanking our panelists.
That's a great job.
It's a great pleasure. Huge honor.
Let's put up the volume. I love how the general got up right away to shake Alex Karp's hand, and Alex Karp was ready to dip. But it just goes to show how they have enormous respect for what Alex Karp does, what Palantir does, and those generals are very much aware of what needs to be done. The representative is clearly very passionate about defense, and it's kind of obvious that he feels that not enough is being done, and he's clearly a patriot's patriot. That's the right expression. So I guess that this is a perfect segue, to talk about one of the deals that was recently announced. My takeaway from all of this before I get into the next thing is Palantir has an important role to play in defense. The fact that they were invited to the National Defense Forum, and Alex Karp was asked to speak, it says volumes. It wasn't any of the big hardware companies that deliver military equipment. Well, I mean, as it pertains to software or cybersecurity, I guess the best person to invite was Alex Karp, not some other CEO from Adobe Photoshop or Adobe Analytics or Google Analytics or Snow or whatever people think that Palantir does, and they have no idea. Now, I guess this is a good segue to kind of touch on a new deal that Palantir announced earlier in the week. I never really got into it, but I'm pretty sure I had it saved somewhere here. Nope, not this one. Was this one? US command, where'd it go? Okay, well, we can easily find it. I think it was space command. There you go. So Palantir secures an additional $43 million contract from Space Systems Command. Palantir announced today that Space Systems Command, a cross-mission ground and communication enterprise, awarded its $43 million contract to continue its delivery of data and decision platform to support national security objectives. This $43 million contract is an additional extension, expanding upon previous awards for April and August this year. Expanding upon previous awards from April 2021 and August 2021. Isn't it crazy how fast it adds up? An additional 43 million. Now they're at 91 million. It's pretty much a $100 million contract in literally 6 months. No, 9 months. This award provides continued capabilities for Project Brown Heron, which enables all domain situated awareness and decision making at NORAD and the Space C2 division under the Cross Mission and Ground Communication Enterprise. Okay, the Palantir platform known as Warp Core. Gotta love these badass names. Is being utilized to make decisions from large volumes of data in support of these missions. Warp Core leverages Palantir as a configurable enterprise data management system and operations software solution that enables the integration and management of data from various data sources and supports application delivery, in-depth analysis, and data-driven decision-making across echelons and functional communities, including for users who operate on multiple security levels across multiple networks. That was quite the run-on sentence. As the application and data landscape continues to rapidly expand in both scale and complexity, Warp Core simplifies and streamlines data management and integration to aid in everything from readiness to improved decision-making. Warp Core's work also extends beyond space domain awareness missions and was recently used by SSC and its partners to assist the U.S. the evacuation of U.S. allies from Afghanistan. The threats to our nation in and through the space domain are very real, as we've seen in recent weeks. We must continue to advance our nation's space domain awareness capabilities, said Doug Pilapone, Doug, Global Defense Lead at Palantir Technologies. We're very proud to have consistently earned the confidence of this innovative organization and to continue our partnership. So, what threats? What happened in the recent weeks? If you remember, there was a Russia satellite that was blown up in space or something, and I'm not really sure if I'm spelling it right, but this missile, like a Russia anti-satellite missile, blew up debris, like an actual satellite in space, and that debris caused a lot of risk to the crew that was in the International Space Station, which also included Russians. So it's kind of very negligent to do that. So yeah, the U.S. has condemned Russia for conducting a dangerous and irresponsible missile test that it says endangered the crew aboard the International Space Station. So I guess, following that, they were probably, the U.S. Command Center or the Space Systems Command was probably like, okay, this is very real. and we need to be on top of this at all times. So now Palantir secured an additional contract. So all of this to say is, as we saw in the video, is Palantir has an important part to play in the national defense of the U.S. and a lot of people underestimate it. My next video, I'm gonna actually cut this video off and post another video because I realized it just hit 1.5 hours. I can't believe it. My second video and it's 1.5 hours. If you really made it this far, thank you. Leave comments. I would love to hear your feedback. Tell me what you thought or what your takeaways were from the panel. What did you think of Alex Karp's performance? I think he did a great job. He's a very philosophical person, and you can clearly see that he thinks a lot before he says something. And he really cares about the country and the well-being of America. And, he really values and wants to position America as the #1 country in the world in all avenues, including cybersecurity. So it's a nice thing to be an investor in Palantir. Obviously, I'm based in the north, but regardless, America is very close to us, and we have great relationships with the Americans. So I'm very happy to see that Palantir is doing a lot. And I heard rumors that Palantir was also exploring some interesting projects in Canada. I'll get into that in my other videos, but stay tuned for my next video. I'm actually going to start shooting it in a bit. It's going to be to run through the spy tech rumors, and is that all Palantir does? What quote unquote good does Palantir do? And that people can understand and see and relate to. So I'm gonna get into those videos as well, those topics as well. So thank you for tuning in. If you stayed this long, I appreciate you. I respect you. Thank you so much. And let's keep this going, and I hope I can keep this going. So thank you, and see you next time. Easy.